Hello everyone, my name is Djamel. I'm a lead front-end engineer at Qonto, and you can find me on GitHub as Djamel Bendaoud. I wanted to maybe change the title of my talk after seeing the Chris one, and maybe we could see this one on how Storybook may be a bit easier than Chris thinks. Anyway, so scaling UI documentation with Storybook. So first, let's define why UI documentation is important. And so let's start with the random number, 276. That's not the number of countries that we have in the world. That's not the number of persons that we have in this room. That's the number of screens that we have in our Qonto application. So 276 screens, it's a lot. It's a lot to maintain. We likely have inconsistencies along new features and along things that are released. So in that case, we can see 5 modals that we have in our Qonto application. You can spot some inconsistencies. So the red dot doesn't appear, but you can see that the titles are not the same in this modal. It's barely visible, but the descriptions are not quite the same in this modal. So for example, it has the same size as the title. Sometimes it's very tiny, barely readable, and sometimes it's in bold and in dark. And if you closely look, we also have, so it's a bit difficult, but there is not the same spacing in the modal, and there is not the same spacing in those buttons. And so using or even building new component will create unnecessary additional works and inconsistencies, because you will want to, instead of reusing components, you will tailor-made each one to better fit the needs, and it will create unnecessary additional work. And so there is a natural trend that likely the more that your app will grow, the more it will become inconsistent. And so there is many reasons to this, mainly because you have a huge team and people will not be aware that such a component exists and you can reuse it. Or maybe because the component was made years ago and it doesn't fit our accessibility standards or the design, or maybe because the product designers wasn't even aware that we're having a such pattern already in the application. Or maybe because the developer will always like to create a new component instead of refactoring the old one. And so this ends up in a poor alignment between the teams. And when I say team, that's either if you're working in a squad like the Spotify ones, and each team is focused on a dedicated part of the application, or between the team from product designers and the developer team. And so this creates a lack of consistency in our example in the Qonto application, but it also can create a lack of consistency, I guess, in every big application. And this will create rework because you will have to update titles, update in case of that model, you will have to go and update and make sure that the colors match, the title match. And this is not the best part as a front-end engineer, and we always rather focus to create new features rather than updating some color in the CSS. And so if we take another example of this lack of consistencies and how the documentation didn't help to basically reuse easy components, we have close button all across the application. So they are for many parts of the application. On the bottom left is from a flash message. You have the modal, a top bar that are announcing few things. And there, you cannot even see it, but there is a little close words and capitalized. So if we look at those close buttons, they all look different. Different shapes, different colors. Sometimes you have a text. Sometimes you have a text in capitalized that you unfortunately don't see, but that's quite a huge mess. And so we needed a way to easily document our UI component. And what if we could find a tool that will allow us to easily document UI component library, but also could be used by both product managers and product designers to see what is actually used and available in production. And what if we could even leverage this tool to perform QA and mock hard-to-reach states even before going to production? And in advance, I have to apologize for my poor Photoshop skills, but this is where I introduce you to Storybook. So, what is Storybook? Storybook defines itself as an open source tool for developing UI components in isolations, and it provides a sandbox so you can develop hard-to-reach states and edge cases. So you will notice that, and it will follow what Chris has said. I don't think that Storybook is made to basically build a design system, but it will rather be a companion to it, and it will like kind of match with what the product designers or product managers will have in mind, and to be like a side companion, a side tool to it. And so a few KPI for those who doesn't know Storybook. So that's like there is a kind of huge community because it has more than 1,000 contributors, more than 11 million installs per month, and it has more than 60,000 stars on GitHub. And so how Storybook will work, either you will have a UI component library that is, for example, an Ember add-on, or it can directly consume your Ember application, and it will be basically plugged to your Ember application and build an index component to it, and it will like consume your application. Because Storybook, so to give a bit of background, Storybook was firstly made and released for React application. It's actually made in React. When you launch Storybook, it's running like a React application. And so because it's a React application, you will have to run Storybook side by side with your Ember application. And this will be plugged to the dist of your Ember application and basically consume the components that are available. And so this is what the UI of Storybook look like. You will have the catalog of stories on the left, classic, where you will have all the stories available. You will have the sandbox. This is where your component will live. This is where you will be able to interact with it and like to basically play and make sure that the component render properly, for example. And underneath, you will have the add-ons. This is where you will be able to give parameter and interact with your components. And so we've seen why UI documentation is important. So we've seen what is Storybook. So now how to set it up to your own project. So Storybook provides a little command that will automatically detect on which framework your application is running. And in our case, it will be Ember, of course. And it will add all the files that will be needed by Storybook. And on top of that, you will have to add the Ember adapter for Storybook. And so the output of those two commands will create two new folders to your application. The first one will be the .storybook. That is the configuration folder for your Storybook. We won't go in detail in the sake of simplicity for this presentation, but this is where you will be able to register add-on and customize your Storybook and do some Webpack configuration. And you will have the stories folder, so you can choose either to collocate your stories to your component, or out of the box you will have these story folders. And this story folder will basically, as the name is, contain your story. And so let's see a quick demo of it. So I have two open terminal. On the left I'm running Ember, since it's consuming my dist. And on the side, I'm running Storybook, and you can see that it's consuming the dist. So it's running, it's on localhost. I have some Djamel components that are provided out of the box when you add Storybook. And from there, I'm going to go in an application. I've made a dummy application that contains two simple components, a custom button, in that case, that take a button title and a disabled state. And I've made a styled input component that take few parameters. So let's go to the stories folder. And to create a story, you will simply create a new file that will be the name of your story. So in that case, I want to create a story for the custom button stories. So I'm creating this file. I'm importing the HBS to make sure that like Storybook understand and it can compile. And I will export some default parameter that will be the parameter that will be common to all the story that I will write. In that case, I'm giving a title to the story, and I will define some archetypes. Those archetypes will be the parameter available that I will be able to interact with when running the component in Storybook. So in that case, I give a button title that will have the control to be a text, and I will want to have a disable state that will have a control to be a Boolean. So going forwards, adding some comma to make sure that it doesn't break anything. And so I have the base of like the base configuration, and now we will write the story itself. So the story will be named custom button. It will take the arg that are defined above. And in this story, you will have two elements. First will be the template. This is where you will call your component as you will do in any integration test for a component, for example. And the context. The context will be the execution context passed to the template. So it will be, to make it simple, it will be the this that will be available in your template. So in that case, I want to keep the context very simple, and in the sake of simplicity for this presentation, I'm only giving the argument in the context. And I will call my component as I will do in any classic handlebar. So I'm calling the custom button. This custom button take a button title that we've declared above as button title, so this button title, nothing fantastic, and a disable state that will be the disable state. And there I will provide, that's not required, but I can provide some default value for those arguments that I've defined above. So the button title will have the button text, and the disable state will be false. So I can save the file. Storybook will see that change has happened in the code and will trigger again the render of the preview. And there you can see that in the canvas, I have my button. I can click on it. I can change the button title to be, for example, custom button. It straight away update the thing, and I can toggle the disable state, and it will toggle the disable state. So very convenient to test and very easy. And let's show a bit more complex example. So the styled input that take a bit more parameter. So same as before, I'm creating this file in the story folder. It's named styleinput.stories.js. I've copy-paste to avoid losing time typing, but I'm basically introducing a new thing there that will be the type. Those type will, because this tool may be used by product designers or product managers, I don't want them to have a free input where they can type whatever thing and get wrong. I would rather give them some options that are only available for this component. In that case, I'm giving a date, a password, and a text. And the control will be a radio kind, so I make sure that it's not a free input. So as before, I'm calling my template. I'm giving the context arg, and this time I will be providing some default value for the argument, but I will not provide any value for the placeholder because that's not required. And if the placeholder will not be defined, the placeholder will be undefined. And I will be able to define one in my story, but it will not contain any default value. So there, I'm saving, the preview gets triggered again, and I can, as before, interact with the component. I can change the label to, let's say, for example, enter your password. I can define the placeholder to set a string and to be that my password should be 8 characters long, and I can change the type of the input to be the password. And then the story gets re-rendered, and it updates the type of my input. And I can also toggle the date type, for example, and it will take the native elements for the native date picker for Chrome in that case. And so we've seen how to write a story, how to add it to our project. And so let's go a bit further to see how this can, because like we've shown that very classic things that very easy to achieve with any other tool, but let's go a bit deeper and see how you can customize and personalize your storybook to make it sure that it like handle your documentation the best way possible. One easy way to do it is to add Markdown to your components. So there is a package that is named Storybook Markdown, something like this. And you will add it and register to your storybook. It will create a new doc aside the canvas one. And from there, you will be able to import your Markdown directly in your story. So the Markdown is a classic Markdown. You can write like anything that will go in a Markdown. For example, there in this example, we're describing that the display, the button or link display an element if the link is provided. And we did import this file, and we will add a new parameter to our story to take a doc key, and this doc key will be our Markdown. And the Markdown will be simply rendered in the story. And you can have also out-of-the-box accessibility test. That's very useful, especially when like you're trying to be compliant with accessibility and you don't know where to start. This provides out-of-the-box generated test based on the HTML element. In that case, the HTML element is a button. So we can see that we have 7 tests that has passed and 1 violation. The violation is about that the nested interactive control are not announced by screen readers. 7 tests that has passed are, for example, the one about ensuring that the button should have an ARIA attribute, that the contrast between the foreground and the background color meets the AA standards. For this case, I didn't do anything but adding the add-on to my NPM packages and register it in my storybook configuration. So that's very convenient. Of course, if the HTML element is an input, it will be some other test and so on based on the HTML element that the component is using. And so you can also embed some Figma design in your add-on to make sure that when you're viewing the component, this component like fits what the design have think and created to be this button. In that case, of course, it doesn't match, but that's very useful to see that to make sure that the both haven't diverged. Usually, I don't know about you, but when you are having a Ember add-on that is some like UI component library, it may be the case where you didn't work on this UI component library for a month or so. So if you want to get some code, you see a cool component that you want to use in the documentation, you are going to git pull master, open any editor text, going to find either the component and check which parameters are like available, or you're going to check the story to make sure that like to copy paste. Instead, you can register a story source add-on, and you will have directly in Storybook the code that is used to basically call this component. So that's very convenient because you want to use this component, you just have to open the story tab, copy paste, and that's it. And you can also have Storybook be integrated with your existing CI and CD tools, and kind of Percy-like, having like visual regression tests that are run every time you submit a change. So for example, it will take the baseline that will be master. You push no changes. It will take 2 screenshots, compare them, and in that case, some number have changed. So it will make the build fail, and we'll have either to approve the build if that's legitimate, or push no changes to make sure that you fix the issue. And if you want to go a bit further, as I was saying before, I don't think that Storybook is made to document a design system, but is rather a companion. you can embed iframe for your canvas directly in any other tool. So it works in Notion. In that case, ZeroWhite is the tool that has been chosen by the design team to gather component good practices and like document them from a design point of view. And it's very like it's spec, but for very like focused to the component itself. So in that case, for example, you can see that the text label should not be capitalized. You can see that we try to keep it the number of primary buttons as simple as possible, and so on. And so you will be able to embed an iframe that will be your canvas directly in the ZeroWhite to make sure that, as we've seen with Figma, you have the Figma in the Storybook. You can have the cross verification from the design team and make sure that the component is compliant with the rule that they've established. If we look at the pros and cons of Storybook, as we've seen, the combination of props are super easy. You don't have to describe component states like many times. Like, for example, if you want to have each state for a button, you will have to describe a disabled state, over state, an active state. In that case, you just like play with parameter. You can directly click. That's very convenient. And there is many add-ons, and it's fully customizable. And some cons of it, because no one is perfect. The documentation for Ember needs to be improved, that's for sure. Because the support for Ember is pretty young, you will discover some bugs, and it needs to be run side by side with Ember. As of today, the community around the Ember community around Storybook is quite small. We have one member, Gossi, in the room. Yeah, but we are only a few people, and like if you want to help, pair are welcome. And if we take back our example, thanks to this documentation, we've been able to design consistent modal. And so in that case, all titles are the same. The buttons are aligned on the left, and like everything looks the same, and it's even leverage Ember name block components. So it's very easy to use, and like the benefit of it is that we used to take around 70 lines of code to tailor-made a modal to only 21 lines of code. And so thanks to this, you will be able to speak the same language at the team. You will be able to design consistent and resilient interfaces, and you will have a unified, flexible, and modular interface. And because of this, you will finally be able to focus most of your time on user experience. So thanks, everyone. The demo code of the application can be found on my GitHub, demo app Storybook. And yeah, you can fork it, play with it, and see that it's not that hard to use. Thank you.